I still remember the December night my wife decided the little cul-de-sac needed a touch of old-fashioned cheer. She strung lights along our porch railing with the kind of meticulous patience that made her family and friends call her the decorator. The bulbs blinked like tiny promises, green, white, a warm amber, and for a few hours our house looked like a lighthouse in the suburb, a tiny beacon against the long quiet of the season. 2 houses down, a man in a winter coat watched from his window, and the street seemed ordinary and safe. They showed up in the kind of unmarked vehicle that could be mistaken for anything: a contractor's van, a delivery truck, a municipal vehicle. 4 men stepped out, short haircuts, heavy jackets, badges tucked into their belts. They introduced themselves as law enforcement. They said words like violation, fine, and non-compliant. My wife tried to explain that the lights were temporary, that she had checked the community guidelines, that decorative displays were allowed through the end of January. That was the moment everything tilted. I did what any man in that moment thinks he should do. I asked to see credentials. The men laughed with a casual cruelty, told me to take it down with a joke about property management taking community safety seriously. They cuffed my wife with hands that smelled faintly of tobacco and cheap cologne. She wasn't resisting. She was stunned, like a bird stunned against a window. The thing that still rattles me isn't even the handcuffs, it was the look on her face, the mixture of fear and fury and disbelief that carved lines into her normally steady features. I called the police. The men left in the same van, the way a crime leaves a place, with a hole where certainty used to be. That humiliation burrowed into me. I thought about how this neighborhood, the bland rows of trim lawns and matching mailboxes, was supposed to be safe. It was supposed to be orderly. Instead, authority had been faked and used as a weapon. The men who posed as enforcers wore confidence like armor, their flimsy legality hid behind that armor. I wanted them to taste the same helplessness my wife did, to spend a night feeling vulnerable and exposed. I wanted the world to watch the kind of justice you only see in dramatic television, swift, visible, and compromising. I wanted something that would puncture the smugness of people who took advantage of other people's trust. We began with the responsible steps. Someone suggested social media exposure, the modern way to shatter reputations. Another neighbor proposed a class action complaint to the HOA board. A friend advised documentation. File reports, collect witness statements, preserve evidence. Those were the sensible moves, and we followed most of them. We called lawyers, posted on neighborhood groups, and met with other residents who had been targeted. People nodded. They sent messages of support. But anger isn't a tidy thing. It gathers and grows in the silence after polite conversation, and it turns tidy plans into fevered imaginings. My wife's family history complicated everything. Her late father had been a motorcycle man. Photo albums full of chrome and road dust, an older kind of freedom that smelled of gasoline and leather. When he died, he left my wife a collection of 16 well-kept Harleys and a 17th, a prized restoration project. Those bikes were hers by right, sentimental relics that meant something only to our household. They were badges of memory, each scrape and polish stroke tied to a story about a road trip or a stubborn repair job. We kept them in a rented warehouse, a shrine of chrome and throttle. One evening, after hours of forums and phone calls, a neighbor texted that the men in the van had been seen circling the area again. The news warmed the ember in me until it flared. I began to imagine a scene, not of justice through paperwork, but of a spectacle that said, loudly and without apology, "You will not humiliate us." The image that lodged in my head became grotesquely specific. The Harleys, my wife's inheritance and legacy of rebellion, turned into a monument of consequence. I knew, in the quiet rational part of my brain, that this image was a trap. I also knew that emotions rarely consult that part when they're at their loudest. I am not an arsonist by nature. I am a man who loves lists and schedules and the predictable art of a well-made cup of coffee. But there are moments when a person's inner thermostat is reset with an act of violence, not just the violent act itself, but the violence of being stripped of dignity. The plan we finally agreed upon, and I say, we, loosely because my wife's silence and stare when I spoke of it was its assent, was simple in outline and monstrous in intent. We would make a night that people would talk about, a punishment that felt commensurate with the humiliation. On the night it happened, the sky was a slate bowl. We towed the bikes quietly, 2 at a time, like mourners carrying caskets, to an abandoned lot at the edge of town, far from streetlights and cameras. I remember how the leather smelled chilled in the dark, how even the sound of a zip across a jacket felt amplified. We had not planned every detail. Who does when conscience has left the room? But we had enough. Gasoline in recycled containers, a lighter, and the reckless courage that only comes from the insistence that you are entitled to a kind of retribution. The fire started with a ripple of blistering heat and then an applause of metal. Engines hissed as fuel met flame. Chrome melted into a language of orange and black. The motorcycle silhouettes bucked and collapsed into themselves, pistons and handlebars folding like paper. It was obscene and beautiful. It was a private apocalypse. For a few minutes I felt like a man gravitating to the center of his own story, a protagonist who had reclaimed agency. My wife watched, expressionless, eyes reflecting the inferno in a way that made me think she was seeing more than the flames, perhaps her father's life burning away in a single night. What I had not predicted was the sound of the aftermath, not the crackle of fire but the arrival of consequence. Someone saw the glow from a distance and called it in. The sirens did not take long. The police arrived in numbers that made my chest seize, lights washing the lot in blue and red. We were found with soot on our jackets and a lighter clutched in my palm. My heart hammered so loud it seemed to answer for everything. There was no dramatic act of gratitude from neighbors, no viral glory. Instead came flashbulbs, statements, and the kind of cold, procedural questions that make you feel small in a way frustration never did. The legal aftermath was a series of small humiliations. Bail hearing, arraignment, a judge who wanted to know why grown people thought burning property was a reasonable response to humiliation. We learned about insurance claims, restitution, and the slow arithmetic of fines that never seemed to square with the moral ledger in your head. We lost more than motorcycles. We lost a sense of ourselves as lawful citizens. Our name was on the local news for a week, splashed across feeds with a headline that missed the nuance entirely and preferred the spectacle. People offered opinions without the bother of knowing the facts. The alleged vigilantes had become a cautionary tale. I will not try to justify what we did. There is no moral tightrope that makes arson respectable. There were better paths. Exposure, legal recourse, solidarity. Those are the sober truths that arrived after the adrenaline ebbed. But there is another truth, stubborn and human, about why we reached for the lighter. When institutions fail or are twisted by malicious actors, people feel small and raw. We wanted to be seen and to make a scene that demanded attention. We wanted the masks pulled back and the sharks scared away. Our method was wrong, and the price taught us that wrongdoing breeds more harm than it ever remedies. The months that followed taught me about repair, some practical, some personal. We paid restitution, attended mandated counseling, and spent long nights explaining to our children why anger can be a dangerous teacher. We met some of the people who had once cheered our decision online, strangers who wanted to celebrate an act of rebellion, only to vanish when the legal bills arrived or when the human faces behind the headlines asked for privacy. In the quiet aftermath, my wife and I worked to rebuild not only what was broken around us but what was broken inside us. We learned that restitution is mostly about listening and slow restitution of trust, not about theatrical acts that feed the ego. If there is a single thing I want anyone who hears this to take away, it is the odd arithmetic of consequence. Actions intended to claim power can leave you smaller, and acts meant to assert dignity can hollow it out. The fake HOA cops were real in the harm they caused. The Harleys were real in the love they represented. Our response was real and disastrous. I cannot change the scorched earth we made, but I can speak plainly about the cost. If you were pushed to the edge by injustice, consider that the line between protest and destruction is also the line between courage and self-sabotage. I still see the ghosts of Chrome sometimes, a shimmer in the corner of my eye when the town's deer cross the road at dusk.